Person online.
Okay, is that the green light? Are we good? Okay, welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. So good to see you. Thank you to those of you who traveled and are here in person, and to all of you joining us online. We appreciate you being here. And this is the Toledo Cities and Towns Board of Directors meeting. Today is Monday, September 19th, 2022. The year is flying by. My name is Dawn Ramley. I'm the mayor of South Jordan City and serve this year as president of the League of Cities and Towns. I'm joined here by Mayor Silvestrini, our president-elect, and all of you as officers on this board. Thank you. We also appreciate staff who are here, Cameron and all of the team here. Thank you so much for being here and the work that you do on our behalf. Welcome any visitors and those who are here helping out. We got a lot of good folks and more coming, so thank you. We are going to start out with the minutes. Minutes have been sent out, the draft minutes from our August 15, 2022 meeting. Everybody who's had a chance to look over those, do you have any changes to discuss, or is somebody like to make a motion on the minute? Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Carrie Malkovich and a second by Mayor Silvestrini. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes that were sent out from our August 15th meeting, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you. All right, as always, we have a conflict of interest form. We'll just call for those. If anything in your life or your work, your business has come up, anything's changed, and you have anything to submit on a conflict of interest form, please either send that in by email or hand it to the staff today. We have those available. And we will move to our board meeting schedule. We're going to go through all of that. You want to go through it or just point to it? It's
Just
part of the packet. It's in there. Our next meeting is Monday, November. That's not right. Our next meeting is at the annual convention on October 5th. And then we meet on November 14th. So October 5th is our next meeting at 4 p.m. in conjunction with our annual convention, and we look forward to seeing all of you there. You can print up the schedule for this next year. It's in the packet. Okay, item 3 on our agenda, we have.
Mayor, before we do that, can I just add a couple quick things on administrative items?
Yeah, sure.
So first, I wanted to excuse Mayor Kafusi and Mayor Shepherd and Mayor Mendenhall. So in the case of Mayor Shepherd, he's testifying to Congress right now, this exact moment, on behalf of cities. The National League of Cities has him out there testifying about tax exempt bonds, and he, on behalf of Utah, and Clearfield City, represents us on the National League of Cities administrative subcommittee. So he is there in his role as vice chair of that subcommittee. So he's going to try to join our board meeting whenever he gets done with his congressional testimony. I told him I thought it was really cool that he was giving congressional testimony, and that was one of the best excuses I'd ever heard from him in the board meeting. The Mayor Kafusi is on a trade mission for Provo City in Germany, meeting with their sister city in Germany. So because of the time difference, it wasn't going to work out for her to participate in the meeting. And then, so she has to be excused. And then Mayor Mendenhall is unavailable because they recently did a displacement study about housing outcomes in Salt Lake City. And the consultant who did that study is in town today to go through it with the mayor and senior staff and others. So they were unable to accommodate both schedules. So a couple other people who aren't yet on the call, but who they had RSVP'd, so I just hope they'll be able to join us later. But those 3 specifically asked. Then Mayor Silvestrini, just in this administrative items piece, do you want to just give a quick update on the town hall that you hosted last week on homelessness? Because I think it's important for everyone to be on the same page about what's happening.
Okay, so thank you, Cam. So pursuant to the provisions of House Bill 440, which was passed in the last session, the mayors of Salt Lake County worked over the summer to designate a temporary winter overflow shelter in the county. And while there were a number of proposals put forward. Basically, when everything shook out in terms of property availability, landlords weren't thrilled about a 200-day lease and or the use that was being proposed. And so a lot of the private offerings weren't available. And then there were also considerations about proximity to service providers and availability of transit and things like that. So fundamentally, the only site that was proposed was at the former Calvin Smith Library, which is in Mill Creek, about 8th East and 33rd South. And that was selected, and I made a determination under the statute to accept the state's appointment of that facility, which will serve about 100 people. And then the other shelters in the 3 shelter cities will flex to accommodate additional overflow that's expected of maybe up to 300 people or more. So as part of the, what we do in local government, we held a neighborhood meeting at the Calvin Smith Library on Thursday. It was attended by 150 people, according to the paper and according to my staff that counted them. And I'll say that, encouragingly, based upon the experience that Mayor Walker and Draper had several years ago, somewhere 50% of the people, maybe more, came to the meeting and sat through a 2-hour meeting and supported the shelter. And obviously there were people that didn't support it, and some of them were quite upset and angry. We had a beginning of the meeting a little bit was a little tumultuous, but we got through that. And at the end of the day, I was encouraged by the fact that even some of the people that had come to the meeting with a negative viewpoint were convinced that that this wasn't going to be as bad as they thought, and that they understood that we were doing what we could do to protect this neighborhood and to ensure that the impact wouldn't be, totally negative. So bottom line of it is, people at the end of the meeting even got up. One guy who owned a property right next door said, "I came here, upset, and I'm convinced now that this is the right thing to do, and that my concerns have been addressed." So our challenge, and we were working closely with Wayne Niederhauser and the shelter providers, and to set this up, set some ground rules under which Mill Creek will accept the appointment. And I'm confident that this is going to work out well. And we did this 2 years ago, and the rules are basically pretty similar. A little different because it's more of a congregate setting than the other shelter, but I think it'll work out well. And the state is making, I'm not sure the exact number, it's north of $500,000 that Mill Creek will receive for mitigation. That's going to enable us to hire 2 additional police officers to, and we pledged that our cops are going to get out of their cars and they're going to walk a beat in this neighborhood to ensure the protection of the neighborhood. And that's some other things we're doing. But anyway, overall, I will say that, that the neighborhood meeting was successful. I think that we have work to do in the next legislative session to fix the process. I don't think it makes sense to go through this kind of selection process, because while I'm not opposed to moving the shelter around, it's incredibly inefficient to do that, and it takes a lot of time of the mayors in Salt Lake County, and the outcomes, we need to find a permanent solution to this problem. So, and actually we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow with Wayne Niederhauser and other people to both talk about the shelter and operation, but also we have a meeting after that with Representative Beelison to talk about the House Bill 440 process and how we can potentially improve that. So, and if anybody wants to come and sit in on that meeting, that meeting is tomorrow at Mill Creek City offices it's at 3.
It is at
It's 1 or 2, and was it 3?
one's at 1 and
Oh,
2.
okay, so at 2. I'm sorry.
Yep.
So the first meeting we're going to have is going to be shelter specific about the operation of this facility, and then the second meeting at 2 will be with Representative Beelison to talk about what we do going forward. So thank you. That's.
Thank you. Will Mayor Walker be at that meeting tomorrow too?
He was invited. I haven't heard.
He was invited. He's on the call actually, so I'll speak for himself.
Troy, are you able to go to that meeting with Representative Beelison tomorrow too?
Hang on a second. Let me look and see. Just give me.
See, it's something put it on my calendar. While he's looking, I just have a question there. So is this facility going to be for men, women, families? Where does it?
So it's for men and women. And the way this library is configured, it's actually pretty convenient for that. It has two big parts of the library, two big rooms that at this point now this is a library that was part of the Salt Lake County library system, but it was vacated because the county built a brand new library facility on the former site of Granite High School,
Right.
50th and 33rd. So the library moved essentially 3 blocks west. So this building was vacant, but it has two big rooms. One will be for women, one will be for men, and there will be at least one staff person for every 20 people that are housed there. So potentially up to 5 staff people plus 2 full-time security people that are there. The shelter will only operate from the hours of 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and then people will be bused to other resource centers for programming. And obviously it's not a jail, so people can come and go if they want to, but if they leave, they'll be written up basically and may not be able to return. So
This is just a sleeping, eating facility?
it's not even eating, it's
Oh.
just sleeping. There won't
Just
be any
sleeping.
meals served there.
Okay,
It's just, people will be transported there for the purposes of sleeping. There's going to be a curfew where people won't be able to go outside of the building,
Once they're
without
in.
violating the guidelines or the rules between 10:30 p.m. and 6 a.m. There will be bathroom trailers brought onto the site so that people have, hot and cold running water. And I'm not sure there'll be showers, but there'll be toilet facilities. And and I'm really happy we're working with a provider called Switchpoint, which operates the research center in St. George. And they're the operator of the shelter we had 2 years ago in Mill Creek, and they did a fantastic job. And so I'm excited that they got the appointment to operate this one as well.
I have that meeting with the Eilsons on, is it a Zoom meeting?
We can do that, Troy. We have the capability to make it be a hybrid meeting. If you want to attend that way, we'll hook it up.
My only issue is I have a court hearing at 1:30. Now I may resolve that case today and be able to continue without appearing, but I'm not positive of that. So Zoom would be easier for me if,
Okay, we'll set it up and I'll make sure you get a link.
thank you.
And I don't know if anybody else is interested in attending remotely.
Mayor, David and Kelly said that they would be able to join as well, since they were the staff running that. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys could send me an email or something so I can get you the link. If you want to attend remotely, I'll do that. Otherwise, you're welcome to come. We have plenty of room at Mill Creek City Hall, which is at 3330 South, 13 East in Mill Creek.
If I can come in person, I will. I don't know what my situation will be until a little later today.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And I think we had a comment or a question, I think from Marcia. I didn't see what it said. Oh, when is it? October.
So, yeah, when they get it set up mid-October, and then it will run until mid-April is the plan.
Thanks.
One of the advantages is it will be on it this year before it gets cold. And that was a problem last year where it didn't really get up and running until it was December.
so if it's only going from October to April, then is it only anticipated as this temporary 1 year? Or would it extend then opening back up the following October?
Well, so that,
That right
so
there is
that
what
the provisions of House Bill 440 say that a city can't be required to have a shelter for 2 more years after this. I'll just say that I think we need a permanent solution, but we promised this neighborhood it will close at April 15th. It won't be in this location. And I'll just say that, while this location is working, it's only absorbing somewhere between a third and a quarter of the anticipated population that will need shelter. So it's not necessarily the most ideal facility. I think, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk to Niederhauser and Representative Eilson about. I have a plan which is actually in a location in Mill Creek where we might build a permanent facility that could house a temporary shelter, but also provide some permanent supportive housing. That's what is really needed to get at solving the problem rather than Band-Aids. So we're going to be pursuing that, that idea. And that, I don't know if it'll be a Mill Creek or someplace else, but I'm at least willing to propose something like that.
Mayor, may I?
Yeah.
So the reason I asked Mr. Silvestrini to give that overview is because when we get to the advocacy section, we will be asking for your direction on what's titled in the slide is the affordable housing, low income housing piece. And much of that is driven toward homelessness and be part of this overall discussion. So it's important to get that update of where we're at as of today, to then set you up for the conversation when we get to that section. So.
And the other thing I'll say is, I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that we did not have any legislators present other than Mike Winder that won't be in the legislature next session, which is unfortunate because, you know, in spite of the fact that this was hard to do, it was a great example of public engagement and why local governments are necessary to engage with the public on hard things like this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mayor, could I say just one thing about that, if you don't mind?
Sure.
I just want to tell you again how much I appreciate you being willing to do it. As we went through that process, you know, in a lot of ways, I think the process was probably helpful in the sense that it really highlighted the fact that moving these things around is probably way more difficult than anyone really understood or thought. But, you know, my hat's off to you for being willing to do it, number one, because you didn't have to. And I want everyone to know that's the way we negotiated that bill. He didn't have to. He could have said no. So I know what it's like to offer it up. It sounds like your meeting had some elements of the one I had some years ago, but maybe people are getting a little bit more, you know, receptive to the concepts. I'm glad to hear that. I got a few texts from someone that was in the meeting, and it was giving me a little bit of flashback. So I was feeling for you. But I want to thank your council. Please tell them from myself and, you know, members of our mayor's comm. We really appreciate your really appreciate your council members, because you got to get them on board and tell each one of them thank you, because it's important that you know, they're stepping into it as well from their position. But, you know, hats off to you guys. It's a great opportunity. We need to fix and find a real solution though. So thanks.
Well, and my council was awesome. They were all in attendance and they were all supportive of this, and two of them who are closest to this facility in their district spoke in favor of it, which was awesome. And yeah, and then the other thing I was going to say is that I hope this is reflective of a change in attitude in our county and our state, but the difference between the meeting that you had in Draper and this meeting, even though there were angry people there, it was night and day, because we had people there supporting it and recognizing the humanitarian need of it, which I think is a difference. And I know, you know, a lot of people are you know, tired of having to deal with the unsheltered population and maybe even more so the drug addiction problems that we have in our state and petty crime that causes, I guess. But it was encouraging at least to see so many people willing to come and sit through a 2-hour meeting, and because they were actually in support of something rather than just against it. You usually just get the people who are against it. So at least we had that kind of support. It makes it a lot easier for our job when we get that from our community. And thank you to Andrew Gruber for being one of those people.
Yeah, Mayor, thank you. And I'll just say, and first of all, thanks so much for letting me join you in your meeting today. I was the person that was texting Mayor Walker in the middle of the meeting. And I just got to say, Mayor Silvestrini, as a constituent, you did a really admirable job of explaining to the residents, not just from a humanitarian standpoint, but also all of the work that has gone into preparing the site so that it minimizes the impact on the surrounding community. And as you said, most of the residents were able to listen, and some even changed their minds in the middle of the meeting, which is a rare thing that happens in today's environment. So just nice work, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Definitely need to find another solution, because this isn't something that you can do next year, nor can the whole home, right? I mean, after everyone submitted and the entire process, one site was found eligible.
Right.
So that's not gonna change for next year. We gotta figure that out. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Okay, unless there's anything else, I'm gonna move on to item 3. Okay, item 3, thank you. Board and commission reports. Liam is here, our legislative research analyst. Where do we stand?
Okay, we've always got something. So I will start by saying there was an opening on the Olin Walker board that is not appointed by the board, but we did have DWS representatives reach out to us and ask us for a suggestion of who to put on that board, and we suggested Mayor Monson. So we think that would be a great fit. We're really excited for him to be there. As for boards that
What is that board entail?
they have, well.
I serve on that board.
Mayor Ramsey
But
as well.
I don't think I'm a legal. I don't even know
No,
who
so
it is.
there are no legal appointments. So it's the governor appoints and he needs to appoint based on geography. So in the case of Mayor Monson, he was looking for an elected official from a city within the county of the 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th class.
Right.
And so Mayor Monson, it's not a legal appointment. We recommended his name. So now the governor's going to be reaching out to the mayor. But the Olin Walker board essentially appropriates state dollars for affordable housing. So we're going to come back to that
That's what I
board.
was wondering.
We're going to come back to that board here in just a minute to talk about the board, you giving
Yeah.
direction on those dollars.
That last part that I didn't know, I couldn't remember.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're excited for that. And then we have one that this board does need to appoint, and it's for the Private Activity Bond Review Board. If you remember a few months ago, we appointed Heidi Bordeckers at North Salt Lake, which has been great and sorted out. And then we had another opening come up for the spot that Chip Dotson of South Jordan City had. And we reached out to Chip and he said that he was willing to serve another term on behalf of the league. So our staff recommendation is that the board would appoint Chip Dotson of South Jordan to serve another term on the Private Activity Bond Review Board.
I didn't even know. Just for the record. I'm like, I didn't know that.
Ryan did.
Private activity review,
Private Activity Bond Review
bond
Board.
review board. I actually didn't know that was a thing. So, nor did I know that Chip was serving on it. But if you recommend that and, feel like
willing to
that's
do it.
going well, that's good. That's great that I'm supportive of it. We need a motion to approve that, right?
So moved.
Thank
Justice
you.
Bennett.
We have a motion by, okay, a motion by Mayor Silvestrini. We'll take Mayor Danes for the second this time and ask you next time. Okay, any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of reappointing Chip Dawson to this board on behalf of the league, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, item 4 on our agenda, we have a bylaws update and budgeting procedures. We're going to turn to Nick Jarvis, our chief operating.
Excellent, thank you, Mayor. Very quickly, you'll see we have bylaws that regulate our budgeting procedures. When we brought or adopted the final dues in April in St. George earlier this year, it was brought to staff's attention that it would be beneficial for our members to be able to get what their dues are going to be earlier than April. The reason that we had April in there is because before we had a 1-year lag in the factors that make up our dues, we couldn't prepare dues before April because that's when the data would come in. Now we've got that 1-year lag, we're able to produce them earlier. So we've made very slight changes in here, saying that the board shall before the month of April as opposed to during the month of April. And then we just match some language there to say before June when a tentative budget will actually come out. This allows us to do it if we, right now, you can see from that board meeting schedule we've included, we're talking about the first meeting of the new board will be November 14th, and that's where we'll discuss budget priorities. Then in December, we will bring forward you dues proposals and get some direction from the board there. And then in January, our last meeting, right when the legislative session starts, that's when we'll approve dues. So we'll be able to get those dues amounts out to cities and towns in January as opposed to the end of April. So hopefully that will help folks prepare and budget. And so those are the small changes in order to accomplish what the board wanted done in April. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you. This is exactly what the board asked for. And if I think several people, I think everybody was very supportive of it, but I think the original ask came from Mayor Daines. Yeah. Appreciate
I'd be happy to move approval.
Yeah. I think we are ready, and then we'll have discussion if there is any. Yeah, please.
I move approval of adopting the changes regarding the budget numbers.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Carrie. All right, any discussion on this? The reason, for anyone who might not remember, the reason that this ask was made was so cities could have plenty of time during their budgeting process to work this into their budget, their dues for membership, and not get those so late in the budgeting process that they've already got it figured out and have uncertainty, so that we can get these numbers to our members as early as possible. So
Mayor, I just have a quick question.
please,
Will this,
that Marcia,
will
it
it,
sounds like Marcia.
yeah, sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Will this help those that haven't paid their dues? I mean, is this a reason that, given that they don't pay their dues?
I can address that. We haven't had anyone come in and say, hey, we're not going to be able to pay this year because you gave us a number that we weren't prepared for. So the result of not paying dues was not because of this, but we did hear from several city managers that when we come out in April, like, oh, I've already plugged the number in for that. So I don't think the effect of not paying dues was there, but this will help, at least on the management side, that they'll know what to be prepared for.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of approving the amendments to our bylaws to update when the June numbers come out and when they're approved, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing this. Appreciate that.
Mayor Ramsey, can I also ask you to give an update on the status of the Metro Townships? So we extended the membership opportunity to play this year based on board direction in this room.
Yeah,
Happily,
that would be great.
all 5 metro townships decided to join our organization this year. So we have all of them on board. 5 metro townships are in Salt Lake County. We've got Magna, Kearns, Emigration Canyon, Copperton, and White City, all of which decided to join. Their dues based on their size of population range from around $14,000 to the $500 minimum. So that brought in an additional, I want to say 36,000 for us this year. So we're happy to have them on board. They are municipalities. We don't have any plans as of yet in changing our name from the Utah League of Cities and Towns and Metro Townships. But they are not a city or a town. They are municipalities. So we're happy to have them on board.
Do they operate with the kind of like the city council the way most cities do? I don't.
Yes, they do.
They do. And they've, when they were initially created, they had a lot more ties to the county and the special service or the service district that runs there. Now they have a lot more autonomy and walk and quack a lot more like your typical city or town. So.
And the residents who live there don't realize, most of them, that they are set up different than any of our communities do.
Yeah.
And so I'm very happy that they decided to accept the invitation that we all came up with to offer these communities a chance to join us. Yeah, that's great.
Mayor Ramsey,
Yes,
this
Roger.
Roger, I just want to say they've been terrific to work with and extremely patient while this process took a considerable time to work out as to what they were. And also to the cities that history sometimes has to be sort of, people have to come to accept that things are different than they were, but everybody's been really, really good to work with, and I'm glad to see this done.
good. Me too. Thank you. Now, I do have a question. I don't think we even discussed this before. This doesn't change how we set up our board structure.
No,
Okay.
No, it's the equivalent of 5 cities incorporating and deciding, they're members of the league. They can run for the board. They pay their dues. They have LPC positions, everything. So they're just 5 more brothers and sisters to our big happy family.
Well, as someone who's from one of those communities, I can tell you, really, the residents have no idea that their form of government is any different than ours, and they would have no idea that right? Right? Yeah. So this is, it's a good thing. It's good to have. the
It's great to have
part
them
of-
with us,
part of it.
and some of these communities are substantial communities. I mean, Kearns is 35,000 people,
I
and
think
Magna's,
Magna's upwards of that now.
Magna's
Yeah.
27 or so.
Yeah,
And so these are sizable communities. It's good to have them on board.
good. Thank you. Great, thank you. That's a great update. Okay, let's move on to item 5, advocacy and engagement update. We're gonna we're gonna turn to the staff, and just I'll turn to Cameron and then you take it away because I think there's a lot of people who are going to be pitching in on this report. But please go ahead and start.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you everyone for the next hour, because here's what we need to accomplish before we end this meeting. Next week, the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission is going to meet. And Mayor Ramsey, in her role as the league representative there, is going to be casting votes on motions that will reflect everything you're about to review. And so we want to make sure that she's prepared and can be able to say to the rest of the UEOC, which again is chaired by the governor and the director of the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, as well as essentially the governor's cabinet, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate President, that the league board has given this direction. Now, I say that with a couple of asterisks. Number one, no bills have been drafted. So normally, per our bylaws, we only take positions on bills once there's actual language. And to date, there is no official bill language anywhere. So when we get into the slides, you'll see that we as staff played some word games to be able to provide enough direction to the mayor without using the official terms of support or oppose, because we don't yet have bills. But it's important that she's prepared to be able to speak at the UEOC meeting, and as we reach out to other UEOC members to have those positions. The second asterisk is that there are still a lot of moving parts. Just this week, I've got meetings scheduled with several members of the Commission on Housing Affordability to follow up on concepts that were discussed last week, but not yet voted on. In fact, when I get to the CHA, I'll give you the 30-second update of what happened there, but it was, diplomatically, it was an interesting meeting. How's that? How's that for the word? So Nick, will you go to slide 2 and we'll just walk through this? The reason we just put the PowerPoint in your packet on Friday was in the hopes that you would review it beforehand, and so it wouldn't hit you cold. And so today, even though there are a lot of pieces in the UEOC, we're going to be asking for your direction on the growth and transportation pieces and the Commission on Housing Affordability piece, which has some overlap with the Land Use Task Force. The bottom one in the Land Use Task Force is annexation and corporation. Now that is not, we're not asking for direction today, but just as by way of update, the league, as well as the Property Rights Coalition, have had conversations with Wilf Summercorn and Craig Call about contracting with them to help lay out a plan of attack to modernize the annexation statutes. So we would enter into a contractual relationship and pay them to essentially lay out the scope of work that's necessary there. And then we'll make the determination if this is possible for the 2023 session or if it'll be the 2024 session. So just an update there, we're looking at a financial contribution of a few $1,000s in order to do that work. The other thing I'll mention is Justin is still tied up on a legislative call. So when he gets down here, I'll let him give a quick update on water conservation and explain why we're not asking for direction today yet on that one. Okay. So Nick, next slide. Reminder of key dates. If this looks familiar from LPC, it is, but for the fact that I crossed out what was at LPC last week. So here we are today. Next week, Mayor Ramsey's on the hot seat. And then TBD is a big deal because all of the subgroup chairs basically have given direction to keep meeting to get everything ready for those November meetings. So between now and November 8th, you'll see we've got the board meeting during the conference, and then we'll have one more crack with LPC. I should have noted that November 14th will be another crack with the board meeting before those final recommendations. Okay, so I'll add that to my slide. Okay, next slide, Nick. This is the only new slide from what was in your packet. But these were questions that we posed to the chairs earlier this year. And in fact, Representative White liked these questions so much, he told us that he was planning to use them in future meetings. And that is, before the CHA recommends any potential action, will the proposals result in good planning? Will they result in more housing units that are actually affordable to the buyer or renter? and do they respect the traditional land use planning of all local governments? I mentioned Representative White intentionally because he will officially become the co-chair of the Commission on Housing Affordability in January. Representative Waldrop is still the co-chair now, but Representative White has been in all those meetings. In an effort to make sure there's a good connection between Representative White and local governments, I want to thank Councilmember Ebert for arranging a meeting with her, Representative White, and other leaders in South Utah County later this month and in October. So the council member is actually a constituent of Representative White, so we're utilizing that relationship. The co-chair on the Senate side is Senator Lincoln Fillmore, and both South Jordan and West Jordan have had meetings with Senator Fillmore. And in fact, Ryan Luce, the city attorney of South Jordan, and I met with Senator Fillmore earlier this year, and he's taken on a much more active role this summer. And in fact, we invited him to come to the annual convention to give a report in a general session about where the Commission on Housing Affordability is going. So stay tuned for that. Okay, next slide, Nick. Now we'll get into the meat. And one quick bit of background. Those of you who were on the board last year at this time recall that we brought proposals from the CHA and had a lengthy discussion about the dollar amounts. And ultimately, the board last year determined that it made sense to take positions on the policy, but to hold off on the dollar amount, particularly this early in the budget process. But by signaling our potential support for the policy, we then relay that to the governor's office, and the governor's office makes their determination of the dollar amount for the governor's budget, and then it goes through the legislative process. So our recommendation as staff is the same, and that's what's reflected here. And our recommendation would be to support policy concepts, but not necessarily the dollar amounts at this point in time. So let me start first with the rural subgroup. Matt Liu is the chair of the rural subgroup, and that subgroup consists of 4 members of the Commission on Housing Affordability. In their presentation last week, they really had 2 key components. Number 1 was around the collection of data, which if that sounds familiar, it's because that's what we've been pushing for a long time. But they pointed out, and this was a good catch by them, that the housing database that we've been pushing has really been focused on the implementation of SB 34 and now House Bill 462. That only applies to 1/3 of Utah cities. The remaining communities, like a Blanding or Roosevelt or Sigurd or Taviona, they are not required to comply with SB 34 and House Bill 462, but we need to figure out a way to also collect data and then try to provide technical assistance to those communities as well. So that was their first piece, was making sure that those communities are part of the data collection. The second piece was to increase funding support for current programs. And the current programs include rehabilitation of single-family housing in rural Utah, the USDA self-help program, which is considered a sweat equity type program where people can work on their homes and get financial support to work on their homes. And then the Utah Housing Corporation's existing credit to own, which is known as the Crown. The Olene Walker Fund is the mechanism that's used to fund a couple of those programs. So what they proposed last week was a really modest total of less than $3 million. But again, for our purposes, it's just the policy piece. Now you'll notice what's not up there in the rural group is the roving city manager, but we're going to come to that later in this meeting, as well as short-term rentals. So in my testimony last week, I brought both of those pieces up. And on the short-term rental front, I had a meeting with Matt Liu later in the week last week, and he acknowledged that their group had talked about short-term rentals. They just weren't sure where to go with it. And so I told him, well, we've got a resolution our LPC just endorsed, and here's where we're working with Representative Musselman. So he plans to incorporate short-term rentals into his final recommendations for November. So I'll pause here to see if there are any questions about the rural piece, and then Mayor, it may make sense just to do a motion on each piece. So that way, if people have specific nuances on each piece, we can do that one at a time. And by each piece, I mean rural, then affordable.
Any questions on the rural subgroup recommendations? Okay. If there aren't, I'll ask if we can get a motion. To be really clear, the direction from this group, I'll just put a little mint in my mouth and now I'm speaking, it's like stuck in my cheek. Sorry, the directions from this group are invaluable. I need to know exactly where we are at because I will be the lone voice speaking from this view at the ULCT. And I just want to make sure that we can all work together and that I can speak clearly about what it is the direction is of our entire board across the state. So thank you all for engaging in this. This is actually so important. Can I get a motion to support the recommendation for the rural subgroup as listed? I'm not going to read it all out, keeping in mind that the funding is to be determined and we will come back to that when there's more information specifically on the funding for the second piece for the current program.
Oh, motion, so moved.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion by Mayor Tran.
Second, unless someone from rural utilities.
Okay, thank you. Second by Councilmember Bradshaw. Any additional discussion or questions?
Are we still just talking class of county, not class of city, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, well, both. So the class of city is what is tied into SB 34 and House Bill 462. So the data collection that's listed here would apply to a Woodland Hills because you're not required to comply with 462.
Right. That's why I wanted to clarify it. I knew that was the case, but I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, all in favor of supporting the recommendations listed under rural subgroup at this point, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, affordable.
Affordable, okay. Things are going to get progressively more challenging here. So on the affordable subgroup, again, you can see dollars for the Olin Walker Housing Fund. The policy concept under consideration would be to adjust the caps per project that the Olin Walker Fund can provide. The pitch that the subgroup made was that because of those caps, it actually limits the types of projects that are, or types of proposals that developers are willing to do because they can only get up to $1 million per year in the cap. So they wanted to revisit those caps, which could open up more large-scale projects that would be interested in tapping into the Olin Walker Housing Fund. And the second policy piece, and I should mention that the chair of the affordable subgroup is Beth Holbrook, who is the UTA board member from Northern Utah. And then one of the two league reps on the CHA, Andrew Johnson from Salt Lake City, is on this subgroup. The second piece is, someone used the term permanent supportive housing a moment ago. This is permanent supportive housing, but by a new title, because Wayne Niederhauser is trying to get away from that terminology of permanent supportive housing and use the term housing with services. Molly, can I ask you just to take a second to give a quick update on our discussions with Wayne about what this would be, and then also a quick update on the mitigation fund.
Yes, absolutely. So as we're looking at this, I permit supportive housing on my brain, so sorry, it'll take me a minute to adjust that. But one thing that Wayne's office has really noticed is that housing first is really important and services are really important, but neither of them really mean anything if they're not joined. If folks aren't housed, that's a problem. And if they are housed and don't have the services that enable them to be successful, it also doesn't work. And so what they are looking for is $15 million in ongoing funding to build out the permanent supportive housing or housing services available throughout the state. Ideally, this would be kind of, I think of it kind of as like a ladder, and this would be the rung above emergency shelters. And so ideally, it would be a housing option that would keep people from falling into an emergency shelter. And it would also be the fastest way to get folks out of emergency shelters. Right now, we have a lot of folks that once they are in the system, they stay in the system because we don't have any housing, even at kind of any rung, right? But especially at those lowest rungs where they need that support, there's nothing there. And so we have a lot of folks who are just living in our emergency shelters, and that is not tenable and it's not good policy. So that is what he is looking at for this ongoing permanent supportive housing piece or housing services piece. Additionally, I can mention that there were some changes to the mitigation fund. So last week, the Utah Homelessness Council voted to change the way that the tier 3 funding was distributed. So as a reminder, when we got the state infusion of the additional $5 million to meet the cities and locals, they contributed about 5.7. We created tier 3 tiers within that fund. The first tier is for the big shelter cities, so it's for Salt Lake, Midvale, Ogden, St. George, South Salt Lake, and they get the bulk of the funding. There's also tier 2 that gives some funding to smaller cities like Cedar. And then tier 3 is what we created for exactly what Mayor Silverstein is doing for this upcoming winter, which is our temporary or seasonal overflow need. And so within tier 3, they voted to change how that money is distributed. And they're putting in caps with how much locals can spend on public safety. So if you are an existing shelter city, so Salt Lake, South Salt Lake really are the two in this big setting who are going to be asked to flex this winter, you are only allowed to spend 1/3 of your tier 3 money on public safety, and the other 2/3 needs to be contracted through service providers. Additionally, then, Mayor, for your instance, if you're not an existing shelter city, that cap is inverse. So you're able to spend 2/3 on public safety and 1/3 needs to be contracted through service providers for mitigation. I'll say that that proposal caught us off guard in that meeting. And we definitely, I think, have some concerns, but it's also really critical for us to make sure that we're maintaining that $5 million state infusion. And so that's kind of the lay of the land at the current moment.
Can I ask a question, Ron?
Yeah.
Where did that proposal come from of the 1/3, 2/3?
That is an excellent question. It was proposed by OHS, Wayne's team.
And what is this justification for?
I think the justification is that there is simply not enough money in this policy world. And so they are looking to make sure that the service providers have what they need. Mayor Mendenhall raised a really good point within that meeting that there's just simply not enough money. And so while we certainly need more money from the service providers, she used the example that even in the operation of the Salt Lake overflow, it was dramatically more than all of tier 1 to put together. And so it's just really apparent that the need is far outpacing the resources available, and that taking from one group to make sure that another group is slightly less underfunded doesn't really solve the problem either.
Was Wayne Niederhauser at all receptive to the point of view that that the municipalities with permanent shelters and those that might be willing to coast would be in dramatically different budget situations, and they would be in the best position to determine the spend rather than have artificial caps?
Yes, and well, no, yes, those points were made. It was a pretty unanimous vote with only a few of our mayors voting to, and one member of the council voting to oppose it. So, and I think it was kind of proposed pretty quickly and passed pretty quickly. So there wasn't a lot of time to dig into the nuances. I was caught off guard by it. I imagine that the other mayors were as well, but yeah.
We have invited Wayne Niederhauser to come speak to a general session of the conference in a couple of weeks. He'll be presenting on the housing with services model. Councilmember Bradshaw, your points really drive home the bigger point that we discussed at the board level last year, which is that there's insufficient money in the mitigation fund, period, even with the infusion of the 5 million. So we did not add the 5 million piece here because that's ongoing money. You told us to support it last year, so we will be supporting that in perpetuity rather than needing to re-vote on it. But one thing that came up in the dialogue at the COM was an acknowledgement from several cities within Salt Lake County that we may need to, that they were willing to revisit the mitigation fund calculations for how cities without shelters pay into that fund. So that we have not heard that from Wayne Niederhauser, but that just came up as part of the COM conversation as another way to potentially bolster that fund. For now, what we are asking for your direction on are these proposals that really do get to that deeply affordable housing piece, even though he is trying to rebrand it. To give you a sense of the need out there, last year, the legislature authorized a record amount to help in this space, 55 million. OHS, the Office of Homeless Services, received 168 million in requests. So they were able to fund over 1,000 units, but the need was, I'm doing math on the fly, my Mary math nurse was training here, but the need was almost the request was almost 3 times the amount available. So again, we're not asking for a recommendation right now on the $150 million number, but just on this support the policy. That way we can stand with Wayne Niederhauser and say this makes sense, and facilitates other conversations around state funding and mitigation funding.
Question on the 15 million for housing with services, is that just for sort of city government sponsored things? For instance, we actually have a for-profit group that's come in to Logan and renovated an old hotel. And again, they're trying to provide services because, you know, that's, so I was just curious as to if you knew how that.
Yeah, and Wayne actually has a great kind of like chart that he'll present at annual. But essentially what this is looking at is there's a variety of different funding sources that can go into the housing component and can go into the services component. And what this would, the 15 million ongoing review would likely be to pay for like the ongoing overhead of the housing to keep it operating. So like the overhead for the actual housing, like the facilitation of the housing itself. So it's not necessarily money going to the cities, it's money that's going to like the construction and keeping the lights on in these facilities.
Mayor, as you may I?
Yeah.
Mayor Daines, the hotel turned affordable housing complex in Logan has been part of Wayne's presentation over the last few months in the internal conversations. So he looked at that model as a way to prevent needing to construct future shelters. So it would be helpful, and you and I have talked about this before, but it would be helpful as we see these pop up, because there are several, and Salt Lake City's actually just announced that they're going to be investing in this model as well. That as these models come online, to provide us with information on how they're working and what's working and what's not working. Because I remember, Mary, you sharing some public safety data with us about before and after. And there was, if memory serves, there was like there was a run up of maybe like 6 months, and then you started to see your public safety calls decline. Am I remembering that correctly?
Still these,
You're still seeing some.
again, I need to touch base with them again, but they were trying to get some services on site. I don't know if they have achieved that yet. Again, they're trying to, I don't want to take up too much time, but they're making efforts, but there still are some public safety issues.
Yeah, so Wayne, again, there were no votes at the trial last week, but these were the 3 proposals that Beth brought forward on behalf of that subgroup. And Wayne Niederhauser spoke about the last 2 in particular. So Mayor,
I have a question. So Beth Holbrook is on the Olin Walker board, and so she's chairing this group, but she serves on that board, and I know how involved Andrew is as well in Salt Lake City. I'm just wondering, I just want to make sure Christina Oliver is supportive of these proposals. Do we know?
Yeah, Christina is a member of the Commission on Housing Affordability, so she will cast a vote at some point. Her team has been involved in developing the recommendations for both of these groups. So I don't want to put words in her mouth. She and I were actually texting just an hour ago, and so I was finalizing a few final things here, but her team has been involved in developing all of these policy recommendations.
Okay, I think that's what I was hoping to hear. I just want to make sure that we're not going supportive of something that Christina, who runs the Olin Walker Housing Fund, isn't even on board with or something, you know, so if her team's been involved in working with Beth and subgroup on putting this together, that's helpful. Okay.
Well, and we could always use the term of art that we use later in this presentation of support dialogue rather than support the policy. If we want to, you know, recognizing the CHA still hasn't gotten to their vote yet, if we want to kind of take a step back and say we support the dialogue, we're not quite ready to sign on the dotted line, I'm comfortable with that as well.
It's tricky to even ask for a motion on this because there's not specific bills yet and clear language that we are voting on. But these concepts, the policy concepts of adjusting caps to Olin Walker, money appropriation for housing with services, and money for deeply affordable housing fund. Is there a motion to be supportive of where this is at right now?
That's a good clarifying question.
Please.
would the staff interpret that a motion on the affordable subgroup would include support for Wayne's idea of the 1/3, 2/3 requirements, or would
No,
you
that's
expect
why
that
that-
until later? Okay.
That's separate.
That's a good clarification.
Great.
Yeah, yep. Very good
I
clarification.
would just be in that.
I'm supportive of the policy, not just the dialogue. I actually think that this is something that we can be supportive about. You know, while I think all this stuff is subject to being changed through the negotiations, I think it might be better to be supportive of the policy, not just more vague.
Would you like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we support these policies as outlined in that slide.
Michelle Randall, second.
Thank you. Any additional discussion or questions? I mean, I know that there's not, it is vague, right?
So
It is-
since we're saying that piece that Molly talked about earlier and that Keaton brought up, that is not part of what we are going over
Right.
today. So if we say we support this policy, that's not necessarily saying we support that.
The 1/3, right?
Yeah, okay.
And I think that is an important clarifier, so.
And just so you're with that clarification, I'm comfortable
Yeah,
that Wayne Niederhauser's underlying idea there does give me some comfort.
If you'd like me to amend my motion to include the fact that we are not necessarily satisfied with the 1/3, 2/3 allocation of how the funds.
So I think let's just focus on what's on the screen.
Yeah.
And then we can come back to mitigation.
All right.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with just the clarification that's taking
Yeah.
place in this room. I don't feel like
Okay.
we need to do much.
Okay, that being the case, all those in favor of supporting these policy, what do I even call them?
No, just a-
Ideas.
Policy concepts. Yeah.
Concepts, policy concepts, guidelines for the affordable subgroup. Please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
The last thing I'll add on the affordable piece is that the league is working with Wayne's office to do a housing event for legislators on November 2nd. And so the policy concepts that you just endorsed will be front and center as part of that discussion. And we're trying to work shoulder to shoulder with Wayne. Anything else to bring up on that?
It'll be hosted in Ogden at the Eccles Conference Center. Focus is on legislators and it'll take place just before the election, so will likely be elected legislators, but this group will be welcome.
will that be via Zoom as well?
We have another planning meeting.
Is it tomorrow?
I haven't thought that far ahead. Sorry.
Will the times and stuff be posted somewhere?
Because the invite will be going to legislators, I think it would probably be just a separate, probably invite to the board that we can send out. We'll probably discuss that in the next planning meeting.
All right,
That's Zoom.
Perfect.
thank you. Well, that just knowing that the entire board won't be able to get to Ogden, so having that option would be nice.
Yes.
Just an FYI, Ogden is a great place to be.
Of course it is.
But, so Marcia, we actually, I mean, one of the reasons why we, I think, looked at Ogden is that you guys have made some strides up there with what you've done in context of housing, so it is a good place to be.
Yeah. And Carrie, was it Carrie? I'll show you around if you want me to.
Fantastic.
Ogden was one.
And Marcia, don't tell anyone, this is Mayor Randall, but I was rooting for the Wildcats against Utah Tech because my nephew plays for the Wildcats. But that's on the down low, okay?
All right.
I can say, except for that this is an open.
Nice.
Perfect. Well, I'm usually the one talking football, so I was actually pleased to hear other board members talking football. But for now, and
I was
Mary Jane, don't
only
even-
concerned that she was gonna say she was voting for the Wildcats when they played against Utah State. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, we have Mary Jane here, so I'm just, yeah, so that's not what it was.
Sorry, but I was.
So now, if that last slide wasn't complicated enough, our hope is that this one simplifies all of the moving parts, but because of the chuckles, I'm gonna take it as, still not.
It'll make good
So-
sense when he
so to
clarifies. He's
speak.
gonna explain it and it will make a lot more sense.
Okay. So at LPC last week, we had 3 slides that we included in your board packet as reference. We're not going over those today. But in those slides, we went through all of the conversations that are happening at the Attainable Housing Group. And then we reported back on the LPC survey results. We had 52 respondents to that survey. I've got them all right here. We've not distributed this publicly yet because this survey covered property tax, other UEOC topics, water, as well as the housing piece. But what we've done is juxtapose the LPC survey results on top of the concepts that are out there. Now, at the CHA last week, Chris Gambroulis, who along with Orem Councilmember Tom McDonald are the 2 co-chairs of the Attainable Group. Chris presented the concepts that the PRC, the Property Rights Coalition, want the CHA to endorse. After he presented them, to the credit of Senator Lincoln Fillmore, the co-chair of the whole commission, he asked, does this reflect consensus of your subgroup? And Chris hemmed and hawed a little bit and said, essentially, yes, but no, that this is what we'd like to see, but we know local government doesn't like it yet, but we think we can get to yes in the next few days. To which Senator Fillmore then invited me to come up to the dais to testify. And I walked through all of these concepts in more detail and explained where there was potential for consensus and where we're not in an area of consensus yet, based in large part off the LPC survey results. But recognizing that the LPC survey results are simply that survey of 52 people who took the time to fill it out, we wanted to present them to this body and get your ratification that the survey results do reflect the direction that we want to go on these topics. So the color coding goes like this, and hopefully, if somebody's colorblind, please say so. Because I learned earlier this year in a negotiation where I color coded a whole bunch of things that there were 2 different people who were colorblind, and they just couldn't make out what it was I was trying to compare with the colors. So, please let me know, and I can go into in more detail. Anything in green showed up in our survey result in the quadrant of very comfortable with those results, with those outcomes. Anything in gold, yellow, it was yellow the other day, but it didn't show up on the screen, so now it's gold. It showed up in the somewhat comfortable space. Anything in orange was in the somewhat uncomfortable space. Anything in red was in the very concerning space. So we broke up all of the results into those 4 quadrants. And you can see how we broke them down as staff as areas of potential consensus and areas where there's no consensus as of yet. Now, the 10 general topics are on the left. My thought, rather than going through and reading through all of these, because I did that at LPC, would be to ask you as board members if you have specific questions about any of the topics or the survey results, with the intent of then at some point in a few minutes asking for a motion that would ratify the things in green are things we would be looking to support. Things in red would be the outcomes that we would oppose, and then in yellow gold that we would work toward potential support so long as they're consistent with league principles. And in the orange, we would oppose unless our underlying concerns got addressed in the dialogue. So with that, Mayor Ramsey, I'll open up to the questions for league staff about the topics on the left or any of the LPC results in the middle or right columns. Mayor Ramsey, while there's the awkward silence, I'll note the reason number 4 is in italics is that's because we talked about that concept at the board meeting in August. So what the survey results actually reflect the board direction that you said, and that's actually been the most antagonistic part of the discussions over the last few weeks with the Property Rights Coalition is line 4. After LPC on Monday, Ryan Luce and Todd Godfrey and Sean Guzman and Gary Crane and a few others and league staff spent 2.5 hours with the Property Rights Coalition deliberating back and forth on a lot of these concepts. And yeah, line 4 is still by far the biggest.
Yeah.
Questions from board members about what's on the screen?
I have,
Go ahead.
relate this to the HTRZ world for me. How does this interrelate these positions?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So HTRZ, so everyone knows, Housing Transit Reinvestment Zone, the league supported the creation of that tool 2 years ago and the extension of that tool in the last legislative session. At this point, there's no contemplation that I'm aware of extending the HTRZ tool further. The concepts within the HTRZ tool have come up in some of these other conversations. So for example, in topic number 2 on referendum, within the, well, actually, let me reference it first with number 4 with the 462 non-compliance. If a city chooses an HTRZ as a tool, that now counts as a menu item for House Bill 462. It did not count as a menu item prior to 462. So that's a new piece. One of the policy stretches within HTRZs is that if a city plan meets certain state statutory criteria, then other taxing entities are obligated to contribute part of their tax increment to pay for the financing there. So you've seen some discussion in the UEOC about using a similar model to say if a proposal, whether it's a transit related proposal like HTRZ, meets certain state statutory criteria, it's essentially allowed by right to occur somewhere else. So that's where I was coming to item number 2, that in the no consensus as of yet category highlighted in red is the zoning by right concept. That's come up as if a city plans for it in your moderate income housing plan, that the rezone would have to happen by right. That's not what an HTRZ does, but it's that same kind of concept that if it meets this certain criteria, therefore the next action occurs. But there's not contemplation right now of HTRZ expansion.
I just have a question with regards to that number 2 on our not of consensus. I wouldn't say we're ever going to get on consensus on some of that general plan finding being one of those. What happens if a city is, really rapidly growing? I mean, and they currently don't fall under some of those state statutes for some of these proposals, but then they grow to be that within their general plan timeframe. They would be in conflict because they would be growing according to statute, but then they would be bound to their general plan. So I find that kind of an interesting concept that they're trying to do both. And the same with zoning. If you have in your general plan a particular zoning and then that's changed on the state level, you would be in conflict with your own plan. But I mean, just a thought there on how do we, as especially smaller cities, we might not be, required to do some of these things at this time, but there's a potential of a few cities around the state that may grow. I mean, I just think of Vineyard, how much they grew from, 100 people to, 35,000 in just a few years.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, council member. Right now, state law does not require general plans to be updated in X amount of time. It has to be done on a reasonable time frame without an X amount of time. So part of the proposal from the PRC would lock in more of those timeframes required to be done on a more regular basis. And then as a city transitions, a shoulder community like the Woodland Hills gets larger in population, now House Bill 462 would start to apply. And then if you have zoned or if you have planned for moderate income housing, then forces you to accommodate the zoning to implement. And the framing that they've used, which I think is actually has been pretty effective at the Capitol as far as they'll say, make general plans matter, because general plans by nature are aspirational and not binding. The pushback that we've provided has been to say that if you make a general plan binding, really the result is going to be taking your zoning code and inserting it into your general plan and updating that on a regular basis. So you're not actually getting the outcome that they want. You're just moving zoning to a different level. But the main reason they're pushing for it is because if they can make zoning by right, their hope is that makes it administrative and therefore non-referable. And it comes back to the referendum question, which is why we surveyed a couple of other referendum approaches, such as having a higher standard for rezones that facilitate moderate income housing. So if you plan for it and then you come into rezone and city leaders are frustrated by the potential, or not city leaders, city residents are frustrated by that potential rezone, there would be a higher referendum threshold for that sort of land use application as opposed to other types of land use.
So we as city leaders might be found, but then the referendum by our citizens could top that. But that seems like not very good.
Get away from it.
Yeah, that's not a very good process I mean, we all want and will advocate to our death on local control, but it just seems kind of a backwards way of doing things if we still want buy-in from our residents, if we still want quality of life with the growth that's coming. We know our cities, I mean, we talk all the time about cities don't build houses, but we do plan, and I think taking away that ability is really not going to be beneficial in their long-term goal.
Agreed, and that's
There's
why,
no vision.
and I think, I believe members agree with you because that's why it's listed there in red.
Yeah,
Really what we want to make sure we're all on the same page about is what has showed up in gold and in orange, because those are the somewhat comfortable or somewhat concerning spaces that, the opposition isn't as strong as the opposition to those concepts in red.
Are there any implications to TDR programs with this one? I don't know how many cities are doing TDR programs, but ours is certainly vibrant.
So the transfer of development rights, and I'm not aware of how many cities are going down the transfer of development right process. I'm glancing at Ryan Lewis or up at the screen, listening for the voice of Todd Godfrey. If either of you have any thoughts about potential impact on transfer of
It seems like
development.
there could be. We've gone through referendum that was connected to a TDR proposal, but I think heavens our TDRs are almost used up because, oh my, complicated. But when the council has a decision to say, is this a TDR receiving site or is it not? That's not necessarily designated in the general plan. I would think there'd be some implications on this with TDRs. So I'd be curious if other cities are dealing with that.
It hasn't come up.
Yeah.
Well, then never mind. I'll be on my island.
Any thoughts on, go ahead, Ryan.
Contact TDRs, here we go.
Certainly a good question, but it hasn't come up in any of the discussions so far.
there's always going to be a loophole that they're not thinking of.
Do you all know Ryan Lewis, who's the city attorney for the city of South Jordan?
Hi, Ryan.
The guy, and he does a lot.
There's a lot for the league and, do we know?
So Todd turned his mic on, so. go to Todd
Yeah,
first.
please.
I was just gonna say, I haven't heard that be an issue so far. It's an interesting thing to think about, and I'll look at some of the proposals in that context. I haven't heard that come up yet.
Thank you. Any feedback would be great. It's pretty controversial where we are.
How many referenda have we actually experienced since the legislature changed the thresholds to require the, district representation thing?
No, Providence did. That's on the happening. They had a zoning issue turned over by the voters on referendum.
However, that referendum preceded House Bill 119 because they filed the application 2 weeks before the bill went into effect.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about that because that bill was poison. We had one question about that in Mill Creek, and I think it's different in a larger community than it is in a really smaller community. But that procedure killed the referendum. They didn't even bother to get
The geographic diversity piece.
Yeah. And the number of signatures they had to get.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because the league really pushed for that geographic diversity piece. I know because I was pushing against it in my old job. It's ironic. But as far as the number of referendums, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. I don't have the spreadsheets I used to have that would have told me that. But handful maybe in any given year. It's not like these are everywhere all the time. The ones that are out there get pretty ugly and sometimes go to court. And so I think they get an outsized amount of attention. So it seems like there's a lot of these going on. The developers are certainly very concerned about it. They bring them up all the time. But the actual number that happen in any given year is a handful.
I
if
think-
not less.
I think it's important to note that before the bill passed, there really were no rules. I mean, half the time the fight was over what the rules were. The issue now is we do actually have rules. And the geographic requirement did what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to make it harder to get on the ballot on a consensus basis consistent with the initiative process. So my feeling is you're not going to do away with referendum. It's a constitutional right. But now that if the fight is over the substance rather than what the rules are, it's a much different ballgame.
And from the developer's standpoint, just the fact that it's hanging out there, that it could happen, just concerns them on any given development, because they have popped up almost anywhere. It's hard to say which one it is that's going to pop up. It hasn't all been in Cache County, or it hasn't all been in Salt Lake. It's popped up in different places. So I think that's what has them concerned, is you just can't exactly predict where and when it's going to go down.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like relying upon data for policy, I just wonder if the data supports. Most of us on city councils would not be opposed to increasing the referendum requirements, but I'm not sure that it's the problem that it was when we saw some of the really more prominent ones.
The other thing I'll add, Mayor, is that last year, 3.5 years ago, we passed House Bill 119, which is the bill Mayor Silvestrini is referencing, that added the geographic diversity requirements. That bill did not really adjust the signature thresholds per se. It changed how you calculate the signature thresholds. And Justin's chuckling because he and I spent a ton of time on that bill with his former employer, and obviously me here at the league. Last year in House Bill 462, that bill adjusted referendum thresholds specifically around station area plans. And so one concept has been to say, okay, there was this part of the reason the legislature did that was the nexus around the station area plans. Station area plans were trying to achieve this larger state policy objective of ensuring better connectivity and housing affordability and economic opportunity near transit. You can make a similar argument that if a proposal was truly going to meet the objective of moderate income housing or low income housing, that you would have a similar heightened threshold for referendum for that purpose compared to other types of land use. So that was the survey question that we posed, was essentially taking the exact concept from station area plans and saying, should it apply to moderate income housing proposals or below, and it scored well. But again, before we proceed with that, we wanted to make sure we were coming back to this group. Likewise, all those items in gold, it's not that our members were cheerleading these, but they scored in that somewhat comfortable space, which we interpret to say there's a willingness to discuss these concepts and put these concepts on the table. Again, we want to make sure we're on the same page about that before we continue. And I'm going to pause on the referendum and come to the administrative action slide number 3, because this is what we did the live poll on during LPC last week. And in a way, it dovetails in the referendum piece, because a lot of it does come back to the rules around public hearings, the role of the public, the processes around how land use authorities operate. And we think there's a way to provide better rules, which then hopefully makes it easier to communicate to the public. This is how you participate, and this is not when you participate. Todd, any points you want to make on item 3 here on the administrative actions? I can't see your face. I don't know.
Yeah, I know there's so much push on this from the PRC, and we have such different interests with all of our members because our different forms of government impact this in the way we make traditional consideration of certain land use applications. I think the push towards sort of a standardized state, I guess, state statute dictated administrative process is not going to go away. And so I think we need to be thinking on those lines. But the idea of making zoning administrative is a bright line for us. Obviously, that's not something that makes any sense. So when you start to think about subdivisions, conditional use applications, site plan review, those are the things where I think we're going to continue to see that push for a state defined process. And I'll just be candid with you. I personally don't have a ton of heartburn with that, but the devil is in the details for sure.
Thank you, Todd. I have a question on number 1. Have our public safety folks weighed in? Yeah.
So I've got an email, Justin and I both have emails from Ted Black from this weekend weighing in on that, Ted being the state fire marshal. So do you want to take number 1 actually? Sanders, just, because you've been to more of those meetings than I have.
Well, I think Sean's on. Sean's actually better.
Oh, is Sean on?
I think Sean, are you on? Guzman?
Yes, I am.
Because I've been in some of those, but Sean's been in most of those meetings, so I think Sean's the right guy to answer that question.
Okay, repeat the question for me, would you?
It's just what's been going on with the development standards group and what do those discussions look like?
So
And
far,
has public safety weighed in?
yeah, no, we haven't. We do have the state fire marshal there
Yeah,
since the main concern usually is with getting fire apparatus in and out. So Ted Black has been attending all of the meetings. Right now where we are is we went from the first, them wanting to the development community wanting to have and specify standards ranging from the types of hydrants that we have and street lights to all of the road cross sections. We now have it down to just a residential roadway cross section that we're looking at, recognizing that we'll have to look at some other things in the future as far as roadway cross sections. So right now we're just at residential roadway cross sections. We've circulated a proposal from the city engineers organization, and we're looking at that internally. The other side is looking at them as well. They've wanted to narrow the streets up considerably. In fact, they brought up one city's street cross section that essentially would only allow parking on one side of the road, and in those cases where it would most likely be blocked because of parked cars, they said, well, they could always drive the fire apparatus up on someone's driveway and around the vehicle, which is something that obviously we're not going to do. We're not going to agree to. So we've got a cross section proposed right now for residential roadways only, with the caveat that we've got to have exceptions for different cities on park strips that they might require, on different soils recommendations that are needed because of different types of soils, coming up with an engineering standard, and lastly, some way to appeal. And it was brought up that perhaps on the appeal side, it would be through the property rights ombudsman, but we've all agreed that there's just not enough bandwidth in their office to be able to address engineering standards. So we're trying to craft some type of appeal mechanism where we could pick either a group of engineers that we both have vetted and agreed to throughout the state to hear these appeals, or maybe an appeals board with one engineer from our side, one engineer from their side, and then both engineers pick a third party to be the third engineer. That's basically where we are right now.
Councilmember Bradshaw, any follow-up questions for Sean?
Probably necessarily questions. I did raise this last week at a fire open house with my fire district, and they were a little bit unaware that this discussion was taking place, and were concerned when I asked them about the streets. So that's why I was curious, I feel like sometimes some of these debates between the PRC and the league take place. Not from our side, not including, our public safety officials necessarily, but I do feel like the PRC sometimes does their best to not include people that drive really big trucks on our streets until the last possible minute. So I just want to make sure that if we adopt the potential consensus column, that we're thoughtful about all those big trucks.
And I do think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, right now we're circulating it back to those city engineers that are on the committee, and they're going back to their staffs. I know we've got a couple back from South Jordan, just got one back from Saratoga Springs, that they have talked to their fire personnel. But I think that's a point well taken. We need to, once we have a proposal, we need to circulate that out to our fire chiefs and our police chiefs, and as well as our city engineers, to see if there are any concerns on their part.
Yeah, and snowplow trucks often come up in my city as well, turnaround areas.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, any city on a hill of snow needs turnaround space.
And fire trucks on field.
Also garbage trucks.
Yeah.
Then let me hit a couple others just to make sure we're clear on what they mean. And that is what's listed there in gold in line 6. So you'll notice on line 5 in the potential consensus right now, it says none. And this is because back in the spring, this board gave us direction to push back on the state auditor and his effort when he issued an audit alert around separate accounting for development fees and essentially treating them like enterprise funds. Well, the PRC has unsurprisingly picked up on that and is now pushing for that in legislation. And so based on the direction you've already given us at this point, we don't see really any space there. On line 6, the economic development incentives, this would be saying that any and all economic development incentives that the state or local governments issue, so for industrial uses, commercial uses, whatever, would have to have a housing tied to it. Our thought was we got to neutral on House Bill 151 last year, and so that should be our target. So as opposed to just saying no, use where we negotiated on House Bill 151. We're also unsure where the governor's Office of Economic Opportunity is ultimately going to fall on that issue. With development agreements, I'm going to skip that one because that one's actually hasn't come up in the CHA. That's been more just between the PRC and the league. On line 8, what's listed in gold, and then I followed it up with a maybe, which I'm sure is very helpful, is the survey results showed us. In fact, I'll read it here. Require expedited local land use processes for low and moderate income housing developments. And you can see that scored in the somewhat comfortable quadrant. Well, then at LPC last week, we asked the question about whether or not we could use the ripcord and use that to accomplish that survey result outcome of having the expedited ripcord. And there are actually several of you in this room who said, well, I'm concerned about this for that approach for A, B, and C reasons. So you'll notice that we have expedited ripcord in orange because that was what the in-person results were. But we're trying to think through, okay, the survey results say requiring the expedited local land use processes for low to moderate income housing scored okay. What does the actual mechanism look like there? So that's why I listed the maybe, just for clarification purposes there. On short-term rentals, we listed none on the consensus because as of now, that's the Property Rights Coalition and Libertas and others don't think there's any need for legislation. We do. So this is shaping up to be a pretty pitched battle. So be ready. And then line 10, this actually gets to Mayor Walker's question from earlier with HDRZs. Part of the reason that those tax increment dollars are invested back into HDRZs is to try to increase the density and or facilitate parking structures to maximize that land use. And so we have brought up on multiple occasions that we have cities that have zoned for higher density than what the market is producing. And it often comes back to these two pieces. So we've urged the legislature that if the legislature is going to provide dollars in this space, provide dollars to facilitate those two outcomes, which then when a city has planned for those things could maximize the planning outcomes there. So we have other UEOC stuff we need to get to, Mayor Ramsey, but again, want to make, we're looking for a ratifying vote of the LPC survey results, recognizing there's going to be a lot of moving pieces, but this at least gives us more than just simply the 52 people who filled it out, but it's you as a board saying, we're comfortable with the direction from those survey results and keep working in these spaces accordingly.
And along those lines, is there a motion that supports what Cameron just said? Or is there anything on there that you're like, hard no?
Yes, so it'd be opposed
We just
anything in
talked
red,
about the
support anything in green, oppose in orange unless concerns get addressed, and willing to support in gold so long as consistent with lead principles.
So is that 4 motions or 1 motion?
I prefer one. But if someone,
Motion of adopting these recommendations.
well, they're not
And you would just
recommendations.
describe what the recommendations.
Well, they're not recommendations. I hesitate to use that word because it's still often nebulous.
I need words for the motion.
I know. I'm not sure what words to use either. Policy guidelines.
Recognize that these are codified survey
Yeah.
results.
Direct staff to continue down this path, something,
With these general recommendations.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that works too.
Continuing check-ins and out.
Yep, that works. As
Okay.
long, if we're on the same
So a
page. with that.
motion that
I'll make a motion to give staff direction to pursue the general recommendations contained on this exhibit, recognizing that the negotiations will be fluid and
there's a lot more conversation.
that works.
Beautiful. That work?
No.
Okay.
I second your motion for pirate code.
Thank you.
I'll vote maybe.
Okay. Is there any additional discussion about these items as they look up there right
You
now?
know, I'll just say that, I mean, I think that the main thing that staff is going to have to do on this is to keep at least the officers apprised, if not the full board, by email about the developments that occur with respect to these things, because there's so many different moving parts on all of them. That this is the best way to do you guidance.
Okay, agreed. Okay, all in favor of approving our
Yeah,
our approach that we are
Can we just
here on the
repeat
screen?
what you wrote down, Nick, on that?
How did you write that one?
Yeah.
I the series of motions here. So the overall objective is to get board support of what we've laid out in these different sections. So this is on the attainable slide, the last one we have here. We also had rural and affordable support of the general direction or direction or support of the general concepts on the attainable slide as presented by staff.
Well done. All right, all in favor of that, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, please say aye. All right, it's clear as mud.
Okay.
It's great. Thank you.
Okay, and then the next slide, Nick, this will be the last one on the CHOP. But this just so that everybody's aware of what we're facing. We've had President Adams repeatedly say he wants to give political cover to cities. Speaker Wilson met with all the mayors in Davis County last month. Mayor Tran was there, Mayor Shepherd, and we had an hour-and-a-half conversation about housing and water. And as the speaker and I were walking out of the event, then he said, if there's one thing you can take back to the mayors, it's how do we improve local development processes, not just for low to moderate income, but just in general. And he said he understands why sometimes it takes a while, they're complicated, or cities have dealt with bad developers in the past. But that was his request to me to relay back to league leaders. And then we've had a lot of legislators, including some on the CHA, who say we need more sticks to penalize cities that aren't compliant with 462. Now, Senator Fillmore made a data request at the CHA last week, and this is time sensitive. I told him there was no way we'd get it done before the conference. And so it'll have to come after the conference, and he was okay with that. But he's heard narratives of cities, as was described in the CHA, of rolling out the red carpet to commercial development because we want the property tax and sales tax dollars, and then making it incredibly difficult to develop residential units. And he said that he wasn't saying that that was true or not, but he wanted to see data about city development processes. And so I told him that we would bring it back with the nuance that not every project, that not all projects are created equal. And a 3,000 unit subdivision looks different than one application for a warehouse. And he acknowledged that too, but wanted to see that data. So we're going to be following up on that data set. Likewise, Moab passed an ordinance last month, right before their floods hit. So I've reached out to the city manager, but I haven't received her white paper yet, where they're requiring a set aside of new units, not based on affordability, but based on whether those individuals actually live, or actually work in Grand or Summit counties, not for the counties, but work in the counties as doctors or teachers or otherwise, because the market forces are so drastic there that last year they saw 20 new housing units permitted in Moab City. They saw 40 new vacation rentals come online. So you can do the math. We've used that in our short-term rental negotiations, but again, it's fallen on deaf ears with some in that stakeholder group. We've heard from some that there's an interest by the legislature to preempt Moab's ordinance. So we're just putting that out there for consideration. And then in Florida, they passed a bill last year that went into effect this year that requires shot clocks around development processes. But if a city doesn't make a decision by day 31, the local government must start refunding some of the development fee. And the Florida League did not oppose this bill. And we've chatted with the Florida League about it, and they felt like they were able to make decisions within 30 days. And as long as they made that decision or qualified for an extension, that they can live with the penalty. Now, that being said, the Florida politics are much worse than ours. The Florida governor does not meet with the league. The Florida House and Senate leadership does not meet with the league. The Florida governor recently fired a local district attorney because he disagreed with the district attorney. It's questionable whether the governor had the legal authority to do so. So the relationships there are in a much different spot than the relationships we have here. But this came up in the CHA as well, and you'll notice some of these concepts were on the screen that we just had before. So just be aware that we'll continue to discuss in this space. And if you start hearing about the Florida model, that's the Florida model.
I have a question about the 30-day land use decision.
Yeah.
And it's come up before. So that's taking into account an assumption that the application is complete and the work is done.
Sure.
We all know that so often things come in that
Yeah.
have to be sent back because they're not complete.
That's right.
There's missing information. How does that impact the 30-day if it doesn't fall in the responsibility of the city, if it's the applicant that's?
So in Florida, as long as the city says no within 30 days, then the penalty doesn't apply. And that was actually one of the points that the Florida League made to us, was that if they don't have the same framework around complete application that we do. But they said if an incomplete application comes in, or an application that's inconsistent with zoning or any number of reasons, that as long as the city said no before day 31, they wouldn't have to refund any money.
My assumption here is that the expectation of this would be the city has 30 days to say yes.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Right.
What if they
That's
said
not
no
how-
and it's so?
But that's not how it's operated thus far. And
So what about, I mean, our process, you go through planning commission first, you have a first hearing and then a public hearing. I mean, that takes a month. There's only 2 meetings a month,
Yeah.
and then it goes to city council. And
Another
if-
month.
If it's a rezone, I mean, if it's not a rezone, it doesn't go to this. I mean, that's 2 months right there, just for a typical process, if they're trying to change the zone.
you're exactly right. In fact, the whole concept of the 45-day report provision was to acknowledge that because of meeting schedules and notice requirements, that's about the tightest time frame you could have for a ripcord to actually work.
I would just say, I think that part of the city's development process, I realize that some of our legislators are a little frustrated that things take a long time. But I think that there should be some requirements, some more strict requirements for developers. I mean, we have developers come in and they'll start a project and then the prices change and then they take forever. And then if we try to go back to them and say, okay, we're going to impose fees or extension fees or any type of
sort of stick back to the developer. They get very frustrated with us and throw.
And run
huge-
legislation.
Yeah, yeah, and then they run legislation, and they run legislation and make us bad players. And so that process needs to include protections for the city. as well.
I'd also like to get shirts made that says cities don't need your political cover. Is that okay?
Yeah, so speaking on that, on this report kind of idea, I mean, however we approach that, I think we need to make our legislators aware of the fact that that we do not want to set up a dynamic where cities have incentives to deny a project rather than working with a developer. I mean, most of these projects, you can work with the developer and solve the problem, and that may take longer just because they have to go back to their engineer or architect and resubmit. But to say that we have to, make a decision on some time period is going to incentivize denials, and that can result in new filing fees, that can result in all kinds of things, and frankly, also a lack of communication between the city and the developer, where you could actually, be on the cusp of solving the problem where there's, but you can't have that conversation. You have to deny it because otherwise you're going to start suffering.
There's
Arbitrary
for us.
Yeah.
What, how do development agreements come into play here? Because sometimes those take months and maybe even a long time to get to that point to where you're even in agreement on what the development is before you even come to approve it. So would there be some people who would confuse the two?
So I'm going to turn to Ryan Luce to give your 2 cents on that, if that's all right, Ryan, because you've been involved in the development agreements discussions.
The development agreement issue mainly stems from on administrative items where generally you don't need to agree. Certain entities holding up them getting, or the developers getting on an agenda for planning commission or whoever the group of body is. If you're in a rezone type situation, it would be much harder to push times quickly because so much, if they're asking for a new zone, they're asking to negotiate in some way or fashion. And that's why they're trying to start back at, well, if the zone we're asking for is compliant with your general plan, it should be by right, which we all agree is kind of nonsensical on many levels. But from the standpoint of the development agreements, if you regularly do development agreements for administrative items like subdivision, site plan, conditional use permits, that is where they're going to push you on time, because if it complies with the code, they should just get their approval. If it doesn't comply with the code, you should deny it. But trying to force them into negotiations on things where we have no leverage as cities is what they're seeing and complaining about. How prevalent it is, I don't know. We hear anecdotes. It's hard to say this isn't happening a lot. And much of it is around HB 98 or whatever ended up passing. But the bill that said that got rid of most of our design standards. Certain entities are saying, here's how we get our design standards. So if you're not negotiating development agreements for administrative items, and that's where the timelines would really come in, you should be fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Marcia White has raised her hand.
Okay.
Marcia.
Yeah, so just real quick, so are you saying that Representative Wilson is saying that what's his definition of improve, I guess is the question I have, because it sounds like we just went through timing, it sounds like faster, and it sounds like better. All of the above?
Yep, council member, speed is at the forefront, and then all of the above.
Yeah, I think that's what's hard, is that when you're trying to, we're just stabbing at what his definition is, and so that's hard.
Yeah. And speaking of speed, Mayor
Yeah,
Ramsey.
we've got a whole lot on the
here.
ULCT position. Topic.
The good news is there's one that's actual support for the policy. I'm going to turn over to Molly and Rachel in a second to explain that one. And then the ones that are support dialogue and no position yet are all still very much at a conceptual level. So there's really not a lot to deliberate on yet. So Molly and Rachel, will you just take a couple minutes and bring everyone up to speed on item number 1 under the government efficiency subgroup of the UEOC?
Yes, the shared administrator program is a program designed to provide roving city managers for particular
And the proposal that Molly and I have been working on with feedback from AOGs and cities and others is there would be 2 individuals housed at the league that will kind of provide the administrative oversight and also backstop to those administrators who are housed at the AOGs. Each AOG would then have a roving city manager, with 6 county having 2 roving city managers because they have 45 cities in their AOG.
Without 45 cities in their AG, without any administrative staff.
Yeah, so much more than anywhere else. So the goal, what success would look like there is that these administrators would provide a couple of hours to each city each week on a variety of administrative tasks, setting budgets, reviewing ordinances, creating general plans. In fact, those would be the primary objectives. And this would be a project solely funded by state dollars, but that there would be something that we've been talking about is that in addition, these administrators could also assist with other tasks at a subsidized rate. So if they want help with another item, they would pay, say, $30 an hour for that administrator to do that. And then all of this would be administered at the league level where the 2 administrators who are housed at the league can provide backstop if there's additional need. And also we anticipate that those who are going to fill these positions are more likely to be newer administrators. And so if we have seasoned administrators housed at the league, there'll be mentors that provide support, be able to talk through different issues and really train up people. And this is not only an opportunity to provide that support to cities, but also to create a pipeline of administrators who can work in a variety of locations, particularly serving rural administrators. The ask is currently a one-time funding plus ongoing funding. That'll be 2 full-time people. 2 full-time at the league.
Potentially.
And then 10
total. Yes, and that is kind of fluid right now. We're getting feedback from the governor's office. It's like what they would like to see with the appropriations request. So originally we were planning on asking that 7 to 8 for a 5-year pilot program. We've gotten word that maybe it's fluid, right? So maybe it could just be we're asking for a smaller amount upfront and then a smaller amount ongoing, just to fund a program without a pilot period entirely. So
no fee through GOPB, and there is support expressed by the governor's office for the program, and a lot of enthusiasm, especially from the rural communities, to have this kind of support.
You've been talking about this for a very long time, and I'm so happy to see that we're almost there. It's so hard for smaller cities to be able to function and to on an administrative level when all of these other things that we were just talking about come into play, and your one public works and your one recorder are looking around going, what do we do, right? So I am very supportive of this, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. I think it will be a great asset to the state, and I hope that we can get this over the line.
So the 2 employees would be league employees, but all benefits as well as salaries would be.
That's what we're looking at. So right now, there's what we would likely do for the 2 folks of the league would be having them on contract. So likely no benefits. And part of that is because as we're looking at, as Rachel mentioned, we're probably going to be looking at people who would almost be retired. And so it would be a way for potentially like John Park, like a John Park kind of position to come back and have just a true veteran in the space, be based at the league. And then within the AOGs, I think there would be some flexibility there as to how they could set that up. So that could either be as a contract worker or as a fully benefited employee. I think that's kind of some of the
AOG.
Yeah, we haven't sorted that out. Who
Yeah.
employs them, whether it's the AOG or it's a contract or.
Because part of our conversation too is if we're all to be employed by the league, that would double us.
I know.
So-
Talking with our attention about it a while back, she was talking about the possibility of them being state employees that then were contracted to the AOG.
Yeah, and I think there's potentially some concern with that as well. It's like you are a smaller town having the state come in and say, hey, I'm here. I'm the government, I'm here to help.
So really what we need from this board though, is we're to point out that the officers have discussed this with the governor's staff, and they need an appropriation request from us by the end of the
Okay, so we just need to.
So we just, if you support the concept, recognizing that this would mean we as a league would get a direct appropriation to fund the anchor city manager, then we need that direction.
As long as that doesn't change the overall budget. which is not gonna happen.
Right, that's what we're trying to keep them separate.
I'm gonna make a motion on
Yeah.
number,
let's do
one.
like that. Okay, motion on number one. We have a motion
Yeah, this is
by
for-
Kate and a second by Carrie to support number one. Any additional discussion? I'm very supportive of this. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
I think that was a favor. Yeah, I think that was a favor. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, growth and alignment.
Perfect. So this, I'm gonna try to summarize 3 months worth of meetings in 3 minutes. And that is, but most of these are support dialogue or no position yet, which means they are all very much conceptual and the details will be added in the next few weeks. So the alignment subgroup has looked at a lot of state policies, trying to ensure that there's alignment on what they're trying to achieve. On the infrastructure subgroup, we've been pushing as staff to invest in the state infrastructure bank and focus on areas that are lacking infrastructure to open up more areas for development, but also water and sewer in addition to roads. And this, we think, going back to the earlier conversation from the CHA, that there should be a link with House Bill 462 to ensure that cities can qualify for this money and be eligible for this money so long as they're compliant with House Bill 462. The no position yet is a new financing tool that would look similar to PIDS. I had a meeting about that this morning that Justin was on, but we're not ready to discuss that at this level yet. On the transportation funding side, you'll see there are 7 items there. What we're anticipating is that Mayor Ramsey will have these 7 items presented to the UEOC next week, as we want to look at all of these as potential revenue streams for infrastructure. The ones that directly impact your budgets as cities and towns are potentially number 1, which right now only impacts county budgets, but there's some interest in potentially modifying it and allowing for dollars that otherwise under the current law would 100% go to transit, potentially go to cities and counties for non-transit uses. That expires in June 2023, so the legislature has to modify it or counties have to impose it by then. The retail delivery fee, this would be a fee for your DoorDash or Amazon type deliveries. Colorado is the first in the country to do it. It went into effect in July, and both the president and the speaker are on record saying they want to look at this concept. And we've been pushing to say, if you're going to look at it, locals should be part of it because most of these deliveries happen on local roads. The transportation utility or the road usage charge is the future of the gas tax. Right now, we're not part of it because of the way the pilot was set up. We want to make sure we are included in that going forward. Transportation utility fees, the Pleasant Grove case, we're expecting that decision during the session. So we put that on the radar. So you can see that even though the initial focus of this UEOC growth group was to look at state transportation, and a lot of the policy concepts that have come up could have a nexus to local government. The ones that say no position yet very easily could have said support dialogue because we're involved in dialogue on all of them. It's just a matter of, those ones aren't quite as ripe as the support dialogue. So our request as a motion would be simply, support dialogue and develop a position on all of these remaining topics between now and early November as more meat gets put on the bones. But that way, Mayor Ramsey is prepared to say we're supportive of the discussions in these spaces.
I have a question on number 2, retail delivery fee. So is that, right now, point of purchase, that's where sales tax goes. Will this be also point of purchase, then delivery fee for roads?
No, so it's to be determined. There are no details around it yet.
Okay.
That's why I say if we're going to talk about a new revenue stream for transportation, locals need to be part of that conversation.
Okay, yeah. And just so you know, this is not binding or mean anything,
Right.
but arbitrarily, like 27 cents has been tossed out or something
That's the
like that,
Colorado.
Yeah, so, not saying that's exactly what Utah's going for, but, it's the example that's used, and that's what's just kind of been tossed around with an extra 27-cent tax on those deliveries. That could
Flat,
be
no
used
matter
for,
what size.
yeah, no matter whether it's your Amazon box or whether it's your DoorDash or whatever it is that you're having delivered to your house. That 27-cent fee to help with transportation funding. Anyway.
And the 27 cents is what the Colorado legislature adopted. And again, they're the only ones in this country to do it thus far.
Goes to the state then allocates whatever they want.
So right, that's the
And
Colorado
then they
model.
hold
So
it in
that,
hostage if you don't have housing. Okay, I got it.
Yeah. Just inserting, yeah.
yeah.
We get the money, you fix the roads.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
So yeah, we both do a motion on
so we
growth,
voted
basically
separately
growth
on this.
alignment, growth infrastructure, growth transportation, because all of them are
All
either no
together.
position or support dialogue. So
All right,
just to ratify the staff
it
recommendations.
really would be helpful because there will even be more work that's done, obviously, between now and next week's UEOC meeting. But is there a motion of support for what's listed for alignment, infrastructure, and transportation funding subgroup?
On the dialogue, I'll motion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, somebody got that right. Okay, great. Any additional discussion? There's going to be so much more discussion. Like, we'll have a lot more discussion. But if there isn't any more on this, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
I would like to add that I just, on the electric vehicle charging station tax, I think we need to be careful about what position we take on that, what it looks like. I don't want to be, in the Rocky Mountain Power realm of, being accused of discouraging, electric vehicle charging stations. There might be a better way to handle the concept that we need to handle it without there being a economic drag on.
Thank you for finding out.
Yes. Ramsey, the last thing I'll add here is I'm just going to reference what's not on this slide. One, receiving center appropriations. The league officers have chatted with the governor's office about potential state dollars to help develop receiving centers, which is a alternative to individuals being booked into jail who are dealing with addiction or mental health challenges and have been the first ones in Davis County was very successful. So the officers have had that conversation, but we didn't bring it to you yet because it's outside of the UEOC. The second thing that's come up in the UEOC is the idea of state value capture. So the state capturing local property tax around transportation and reinvesting it. We've discussed that as a board, and the officers have made their feelings known about it. So that's not on the list. Likewise, we are anticipating in December that the Department of Workforce Services will put together, and this was actually Christina's term to me, a wireframe around the fair share methodology, proportional methodology around housing that House Bill 462 called for. So it's still very, very preliminary. She told me last week it's a wireframe. We're trying to figure out what data points would be collected in that. So we brought that concept to this board in the spring, and there was a lot of angst about it, but just know that's proceeding. We're still engaged in dialogue. It's just not ready for additional dialogue at this level yet. Thank you for the direction. Nurse Ramsey will coordinate between now and next Tuesday. And then I realize it's 11:30. My ask is people give us 8 more minutes to 11:40 because Rachel and Justin have 2 quick things they need to update us on. And then I'll give a 1 minute shout out about annual. So Justin.
I'm not going to take you close to 8 minutes. So some of you are aware that the Legislative Auditor's Office, now, again, I said the Legislative Auditor's Office, not the State Auditor's Office, 2 different entities, but need to make the distinction. Legislative auditors have completed an audit and are going to be reporting on it tomorrow regarding TIF. The way legislative audits work is they can share them with certain people. We were able to get a copy, Roger and Cam and I were able to see it. 10 of the cities that were involved in it were able to see the audit, but it's not public, so we can't talk about a whole lot that's in it yet. What we'll see is they're reporting on it tomorrow in the audit subcommittee. On Wednesday, they will also be talking about it in the economic development interim committee. They will also be talking about it in the political subdivisions interim committee. I will be commenting in all 3 of those committees, not in detail about what's happening with the 10 specific cities, but just generally. And to give you a quick overview, I don't think this is spilling anything that's too, so Roger, scream if I say anything super wrong here, as far as things I shouldn't say, but they're mostly concerned with accounting procedures. There's nothing that they're looking at here that is going to come off making cities look particularly bad, or it's not going to come off as a very negative audit. But they do have some things they would like to see as far as how some of this is accounted for, how some of it is tracked, what happens with unexpended funds. So there's not going to be anything that's very negative that comes out of this, but there could be legislation that comes out of it that we will need to consider about some of the practices around how TIP operates. So I want to give you the update on that. It will be public as of tomorrow, and then we can have some more in-depth discussions. But the real heads up is the report's coming. There's nothing terribly bad in it. Some of the individual cities have some exceptions to some of the things they're saying, but overall, nothing terribly bad. Likely to be legislation, and then we're gonna have plenty more discussions about what that looks like or how we feel about it going forward. So feel free to ask me questions. I can't answer all of them today, but it's gonna be very public tomorrow, and then we can have more in-depth discussions. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to field them right now.
And mine is just to give you an update on the growth conversations that are happening as an overview. There were 3 specific appropriations to help local governments, particularly manage growth. The first is for statewide growth conversations, and that is being managed at GOPD by Laura Hanson, the state planner. That is supposed to be a public-facing engagement. They've hired Envision Utah to go out and talk to, talk to the residents and see how they feel about growth. And then that's going to inform a public, like a public campaign to try to, we've asked the success, what is success? It's letting people know that we know this is hard and we're doing something, like we're engaged. That the state and local governments are engaged in trying to manage growth and make sure it's, as least painful as possible. And so the Penna Powers, the PR firm, is the ones who's doing the public campaign. They're working on it, and they'll be using the Envision Utah data. The second one, it was given to Greg Hall, Utah Land Use Institute. There have been 2 of those. Some of you went, love it. Okay, looking at you. So
There was another attendee that I don't think loved the
many. So I'm not calling you out, although I think it's. So what those are supposed to be, it's an undefined what is success look like, but we understand, and that one is not managed by GOPD, that is managed by DWS, and Oliver, that's our contract, and that is supposed to provide some training, but also in its current iteration, an opportunity for local officials to tell the state what they think about growth. Our position. So we've been involved in trying to shape those and manage those, and our position being we know how our local officials feel about it. We know what the stressors are and the pros and cons and all of that. And so we're trying to shape those into be something more attractive. There was going to be one on October 14th in Salt Lake County. That has been canceled. The Utah County one is also on hold. There's one in Tooele County on September 29th. And that one's going to be a little more free form where they just, it's going to look a little bit like our caucuses where they present questions and people say, these are the things we're doing, these are our concerns. And the third appropriation and contract is going to Envision Utah to do an ordinance review to see how to manage those. Would welcome any feedback that if you haven't already provided it on how to make these efforts as effective and useful to you as possible. Laura Hanson is also trying to work with the other stakeholders, specifically ULUI and Stephen Oliver, to try to bring them all into one umbrella so that these growth conversations are moving in a singular direction. They don't all have the same objectives, but individually, but the goal being that overall the state is communicating with local governments and with residents and trying to provide resources and training, whatever that might look like. And we are very engaged in this effort to make sure that these 3 parts work together and that they work for you as local officials.
Can we do we have a better understanding yet why DWS would put out a contract like this with somebody else to come and do the same thing that the governor's office and the legislature has assigned to GOPD and Laura Hanson to do? I've been asked that and I haven't had a good answer there.
Yeah, so I was there when both of these paths started. And one thing Rachel said that is really important, the GOPB money is public facing. It's supposed to be engaging the general public. What the original intent of the DWS money, both part one and part two, was around providing tools to local governments to help them. So they are actually supposed to be doing different things, but the initial two of the DWS funded programs felt a lot more like this, the public engagement one, but not for the public, it was for our members. So that's why Rachel spent a tremendous amount of time over these last few weeks trying to help sort all three of these efforts into lanes so that we know who the audiences are and we know what we're trying to accomplish with each of them.
And the lane piece being a really important piece, we're trying to get each of these entities to be clear about what lane they're in, what they want to accomplish, and then what their leads lane is and what all these other partners are supposed to be doing. Because some of these have been at cross purposes, and we're trying to manage them. Laura has been and Craig have been really collaborative in working with us, and we're just trying to work through these hiccups so that by the time we actually go to Salt Lake County, that it's more productive than I think the Davis County one was. Some people who went to the Davis County one thought it was good. I'd say our electeds did not, by and large, find it useful. We're looking at November dates for the credit call portion, but that also seems really soon, given we haven't sorted out who's in which lane and what does success look like for each of these efforts. We know what Laura's is. I'm trying to sort out what ULU is supposed to accomplish.
Thank you.
Then
You'll
will
let
you
very
just- will you just-
diplomatic.
will you just mention where you'll be tonight? Because Councilmember Lynch just put it on the screen too.
Oh, I'll be there.
There you go.
I'll be in Ebro at the Regional Growth Summit, which actually highlights the fact that there's this growth summit. Jessica's serving on the Utah Valley Chambers Growth Summit Committee, as is Carrie. There's another one, there are multiple growth summits happening right now, and trying to make sure that we're sorting out how to make these most useful to.
How can we handle the growth so much?
That's right. the growth.
That's a fair question.
But and Rachel didn't mention the Cache Valley one, which Justin will be attending next year in November. So yeah, they're
We're really looking, we've structured our growth summit to, we identified the metrics prior, and so our speakers will all be speaking subjects that align with this, but then with specific metrics in mind, so that we can track the data going forward as an annual summit.
Well, that's actually a nice pivot to the last item that I wanted to bring up in the executive director's report, and that's the annual convention. One is a request. We'd hope to have some dialogue today about how to make sure the caucuses at our conference are the most effective. So my request is just simply this week, shoot us an email or a text, you can send to me, ideas of what you would like to see happen during those caucus meetings. In the spring, we asked two questions. One of that Laura Hansen helped us develop around what does success look like on the growth campaign, and another around water conservation. We got a tremendous amount of feedback from the members that we have shared far and wide. And what we're looking at right now is we've offered Laura a chance for follow-up questions. We're waiting to hear back from her. And then the second question we've discussed internally, having a focus on civility and how cities are handling incivility in meetings or promoting civility, and trying and knowing that there's a lot of overlap with the frustrations around growth, and how do we mesh those two pieces. So we don't have time for that discussion, but just my request to you as board members is, if you like those two concepts for the caucus discussions, just shoot me a text or send an email. Or if you think, hey, if I'm getting together with all of these fellow city leaders from these types of communities, I think we ought to talk about X, and then send that to us so we can make those final determinations. We will be having a meeting for this first and second class city mayors and city managers in November as a follow-up. So if you have an RSVP for that, the cities in first and second class, please do so. National League of Cities will be in Kansas City in November, so let us know if you're interested in going. And then Mayor, I want to end on a really exciting note about annual. Katie Harley, who's sitting over by the wall, who we hired right before the pandemic to be our event and strategic planning or strategic partnership coordinator, has really shattered the previous record for the number of exhibitors and sponsors at the League conference. So I just wanted to thank Katie publicly, because this coming annual in a couple of weeks, we will have 8 more sponsors, which sponsors pay at a higher rate than the normal vendors. So due to her efforts, we've increased our sponsorships by roughly a third just this year post-COVID. So Katie, anything you want to add to that? Yeah. So terrific work by Katie, and we're excited to host everybody at the convention. We'll have the board meeting at the end of day 1, but we're excited to have everyone at South House in 2 weeks.
If you have not registered yet, we have extended our deadline without a late fee, so make sure. you
Until
get
this
registered
Friday.
By this Friday. We're looking very good on registration as well, so very excited.
Thank you. All right, unless anybody has anything else that's pressing and has to be discussed right now.
We'll discuss, I just want to remind that everybody, there are 3 meetings left of the Outdoor Recreation Commission strategic plan. This will feed into how much money is asked for the legislature to contribute to outdoor recreation grants. So the Wasatch Front Group, the 6 county group, and the 5 county group are still yet to meet. I apologize that one of those is on the 6th of October.
Awkward.
Yeah.
The one on the 14th of October, totally fair game. Depending on which county group you fall in.
And we'll have Representative Sequist presenting on this during the business session on Friday.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
so moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you who joined us online. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you to all of you who are here in person. Appreciate it. Thank you guys for all your work.
Trini, go fast.
Yeah.
So